people ask me. Well, actually, no one has ever asked me. Well, the voices in my head once woke me up screaming I was no good because my daddy, the Earl Duke Flange of Kidderminster, never loved me and much preferred conversing with a small cup of pudding he kept under his hat. But, oh, wait, I've lost my thread. Oh, there it is. Oh, no, that's just my cricket sweater. Oh, I know. Yes, that's right. Okay. Many people, I'm sure, would like to know where podcasts come from. Now, before you give some smart-ass millennial answer about apples or windows and jobs and other such gumfoonery, let me assure you young snappers of the whip that the real truth goes back a lot earlier than your so-called invention of the so-called iPod by some so-called humans in so-called SoCal, in a garage wearing ironic T-shirts probably baked out of their melon gourds after consuming some illegal substances or overdosing on Full House reruns ironically. The real history of the podcast, or pluricastellari as they were originally called in 18th century Botswana by Italian missionaries, starts when said men of the cloth roaming the African continent spreading fear, untruths and a vast supply of tall papal hats came across wonderfully jolly folk playing drums and communicating to each other about topics such as movies, music, serial killers, politics, when McDonald's used to serve pizza, interviews with notably famous cheesemakers of the day, and of course how to desalinize vast oceans to make more drinking water for humans, puffins, tiny dogs and vegetables. So amazed were the Italians that they promptly raced home, woke up 3 men called Fellini, Fulci and Argento, and asked them if they could get to work making utterly random and barkingly mad movies so they would have something to podcastellari about. Also, they requested if they could occasionally have tits in them, so much the better. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Steve Guttenberg, well-known funny man, and not many people know this about him, but he can also bend spoons, shave a chicken in under 15 minutes with a cheese grater, and play the glockenspiel, was already creating his own form of communication that was a bit like radio and a bit like twatting about by yourself in a dark room for the hopeful adoration of others, only he was calling it the podium casket, in reference to the hilarious fellatio scene in Police Academy 1, but also the knowledge that all, yes, even the great Steve Guttenberg, must one day die. That was part 1 of My Silly Biscuits, a 45-part serial on the rambling mind of Billy Wap 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 Smith, who suffered a serious brain injury at the tender age of 47 and appears on Radio Flange Goblet as a favour to his auntie, who gave us lots and lots of money. Next up, it's a show that has never paid us any money whatsoever and for the last 6 months has been barricaded in a studio, surviving only on old cheese and onion crisps, Ribena, and naughty flick books that they've created using post-it notepads, an old pencil, and very dim memories. It's the After Movie Diner.
You're listening to the After Movie Diner with your host, Jon Cross.
That's right. My name is Jon Cross. Thank you very much, Spike. And if you'd like to contact the After Movie Diner, don't forget you can email us at hello@aftermoviediner.com or leave us a voicemail by calling 347-669-0053 or by going to www.speakpipe.com/aftermoviediner. All things are available to you. Also, if you wish to support the show because you like us just that much, why not go over to patreon.com, that's patreon.com/aftermoviediner and sponsor the show, or indeed, you can rate and review us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, and wherever podcasts are found. Last but not least, completely at no charge to you, you can bookmark aftermoviediner.com as amazon.com, and when you go to make a purchase from Amazon, just click through our site, through the banner at the very top of the website. I've made it as easy and obvious as possible. It's one extra click. You get to Amazon just a split second slower, And whatever you purchase in that time period, we will get a little bit of scratch back for it. What a wonderful, wonderful service. And it doesn't cost you anything extra. So why not do that? Bookmark aftermoviediner.com as Amazon.com. Or better still, just bookmark aftermoviediner.com and read some of our bloody stuff. My guest tonight hosts a podcast that has been reviewed by Entertainment Weekly, the AV Club, and something called Paste Magazine, which I presume is a wax paper periodical about spackle, filler, and grouting. The only similarity between this podcast and his is that it is relentlessly long-winded. Apart from that, they cover films you might actually want to watch. It is filled with interesting information, knowledge, insight, expertise, and impressive and famous interviewees talking endlessly about why they're all so talented. Basically, everything this show isn't. Oh, and it has a big loyal audience, unlike this show. But he doesn't know that, but basically he's slumming it massively. I've tricked him into, finally, after 5 years of a fierce, passionate, and utterly made-up and imaginary rivalry between us, in the vague hope of giving this show a bit of class, and even in the hope of piggybacking on the back of his massive internet fame. He's the legendary, the knowledgeable, and I'm pretty sure he wants to punch Quentin Tarantino and all of his friends in the balls. It's Mike White from the awesome Projection Booth podcast. Mike, good evening.
Wow, I don't know if I can live up to that intro. That is amazing.
Well, I felt like I had to write something. I've started this trend on the show now of writing ridiculous introductions. So I decided to kind of mythologize you as best I could because I feel like the Projection Booth is the movie podcast that everyone, sort of every other movie podcast, kind of hopes to be in their own way.
Wow, that is quite a compliment. Thank you very much. And keep them coming.
Well, I'll do my best. No, it's funny. I was thinking like a lot of movie podcasts that I listen to, because I've sort of recently got on board with the whole kind of pod and family thing and various other kind of movie hashtag podcast things on Twitter in the vain hope of either seeming more popular or trying to make myself more popular. Because let's be fair, podcasts are all about attention seeking. I have been listening to movie podcasts. I listen to yours, obviously. And it makes me laugh every time that people must tune into my show and go, oh, great, another movie podcast. And they put it on. And then there's like 3 minutes of madness at the beginning. And I'm sure, because everyone else just has like a little music. And then in they go. And everyone knows what they're getting. And people must listen to my show and go, what the fuck? And then turn off. By the time the music comes on and people are talking about the film, it's like 20 minutes in. So I feel that at least on that level, while we both do long shows, at least your show is all about the film.
Well, there was one show I was listening to, and it was one of the, typical round table show, and they must have had 7 people on the show. It's just insane. And, a lot of shows will do the, hey, what have you been watching lately? I respect that. That's no big deal. But after 7 people are, what have you been watching lately? It was like 45 minutes, and they still had yet to talk about the movie.
Right. No, I mean, I've been on a couple of those shows. And that's what it's wonderful if, like, the couple of shows I've done where it's, yes, we've picked a film each, and yes, we're going to talk about it, but ultimately that's really not the point of the show. I don't think those shows in particular are interested in anything more than once a week I get together with my friends and I talk about movies. And because we all live in different parts of the country or even parts of the world, that's what we do. The fact that anyone listens at all is fine and wonderful and a joy, but they're not doing it for anything more than just the hangout, So the fact that it goes 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours, and the fact that an hour of that is what did you watch this week, sort of doesn't bother anyone because we're all just having fun with the conversation. And I'm happy to, like, my show can be a bit like that sometimes, but ultimately I've been trying my hardest to kind of nail it down to 1 or 2 movies and relatively keep in that kind of arena, although the last few shows have devolved into politics.
It's hard not to these days.
Right. In fact, this is probably the first film that I've done in a while that kind of doesn't have... I was watching it again tonight. I don't think it has any kind of parallels or relevance or, we can't really crowbar it into being about what's happening now, whereas the blaxploitation films I've been covering and a couple of the other films I've done have a little bit of, you can kind of tangentially find a relevance. So that's why the conversation tends to devolve into politics. But not this week. So, sir, why don't you let the listening several know which film we're covering?
Well, we are going to be talking about Jack Hill's Pit Stop, also known as The Winner, or might have been called Winner at one time. Not Charlie Sheen's Winning, unfortunately, but it was Jack Hill's racing film, you can also call it, and it is about figure-8 racing, which most of the time I would call smash-up derby, but figure-8 racing is a quote-unquote legitimate style of racing.
Right, but it was particularly popular for a very brief window, I believe. Like, this film was, I mean, it might still be going now, but I think that at its height, I seem to remember on the extra features or something on the Blu-ray they were talking about, really it was just sort of it was publicly known as a big thing for maybe only a year or something while they were making the film.
Well, I actually grew up near a racetrack, and my stepfather was a stock car racer. And I spent many, many weekend evenings down at the Flat Rock racetracks, and they would do regular stock car racing for most of the night, and then at the end they would set up the figure-8 and then do the figure-8 racing, and it was just amazing to watch in person. So this movie really kind of has a special place for me, just kind of taking me back to the track, and the noise, the smells, everything just kind of comes back when I watch this film.
Yeah, because of course, stock car racing, I'd known about for obviously decades, and I knew what that was, and I'd seen it, and I think it had even been not only in movies but also sort of televised occasionally. And I believe they do it in the UK and even in Europe and stuff, I believe. But the figure-8 one in particular was new to me when I first saw this. So this was the second time I watched this tonight. We watched this when I first got the Arrow Blu-ray through. Whenever that was, middle of last year this came out, I think, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so Arrow have done an incredible job cleaning up this film, and they've been releasing a few Jack Hill films over the years, and he really is he really is a fascinating director, and especially in this film, the cinematography and the storytelling. And what he's able to convey, really just using kind of the sound of the racing mixed with this kind of dirty, grungy blues soundtrack, it's pretty incredible. It's one of those movies where I kind of described the intensity kind of burning off the screen. I've not really kind of seen that. I've seen it in photography before, in still images, but I'd never really seen it in quite this way in a black and white film.
Yeah, I almost want to go back and see if I still have the Johnny Legend VHS, because that's when I first saw it, was when Johnny Legend was putting out these the series of Jack Hill films, the ones that everybody knows, The Big Bird Cage, The Big Doll House, Spider Baby, and these were all coming out on VHS, and I think new transfers were made, but again, to VHS. And I remember it looking really good, but I do not remember, of course, it looking as sharp as it is now. And I don't remember the bluesy soundtrack from the first time, because it is so out in front, and that rock guitar in the opening is really right out in front. I was just like, wow, was that there the first time I watched this? But I'm not saying that Arrow did anything untoward. I believe it was there. I think it was just my fuzzy memory of it. Right.
No, I've seen quite a few of his now. And certainly in terms of artistry, and that might be a weird word to use, I don't know that it is, but I mean, in terms of artistry, this is certainly one of his that, to me, stands out on sort of all cylinders, to use the racing metaphor. Because while I love, Coffee and Big Birdcage and films like that for their performances and their exploitation elements and other things that are within the film, this one, to me, I feel like this could be a silent movie playing on a screen in a gallery and would be as fascinating just for the photography and the shots and the atmosphere that the images create. I think it's quite incredible in that regard. I mean, to me, it fits in with, you can feel the dust of the track, you can smell the grease of the engine, you can, it fits in with, the old diners that I love, or, Tom Waits albums for some reason, or something like that. Like, it just has a real incredible emotive and what's the word? Like, just atmosphere to it. It's just incredible. I'm quite mesmerized each time I watch it.
Yeah, it is a beautiful, beautiful film to look at. And you're right, the cinematography, the framing of everything is wonderful. And then just, the artistry of him intercutting these obvious process shots going on here or rear projection shots when it comes to the racing. I think it stands out. It looks terrific.
Yeah, and it's pretty flawlessly done. Obviously, one of the hilarious things about that is, of course, one of our actors in this, Sid Haig, playing the wonderfully named Hawk Sidney, actually couldn't drive.
Yes.
And didn't tell Jack Hill till after he was cast. A lot of that rear projection stuff where they're all pretending to be careering around this racetrack is him simply miming because he had no idea what he was doing. I mean, other than obviously he understands if you turn it left, the car goes left. If you turn it right, the car goes right, So we'll get into the story a little bit, such as it is. Do you want to sort of break down who's in it and what they're doing?
Well, sure. I mean, we've got Brian Donlevy, and this is his last film, and he plays a cat named Grant Willard, and he is, he's a little bit of a mogul. He's got some fingers in some different pies. I don't know how much money there is to make in this racing game, but apparently there's some, and he seems to be very interested in it, and he approaches I don't want to call him our hero because he's kind of a heel. Rick Bowman, who's played by Richard Davalos, who's going by Dick Davalos in this one. And I can't say, I know I've seen him in other things, but he's not one of those people where I was just like, oh, it's that guy. He just seemed to have flown under the radar. I mean, I've seen Cool Hand Luke, obviously. I've seen Kelly's Heroes. He's in those. He's been in a ton of other things, but he's not a face that I recognized immediately. And Rick Bowman, he definitely is a character with a chip on his shoulder. He does everything the hard way, and yet he manages to take to racing. When we first meet him, he is a dragster and beats the car that Grant Willard has kind of funded. He owns this car, and unfortunately Rick gets busted by the cops, but then Grant comes along and bails him out of jail, which was a nice thing. But then I think Rick almost – do you think that he kind of holds it against Grant because he doesn't want to owe anything to anybody?
Yeah, there's a whole thread, especially when he goes to the junkyard to buy a car to fix it up. There is a whole thread where he makes it very, very clear that he doesn't want to owe anybody anything and everything needs to be his. And even actually when he comes to bail him out at the beginning of the movie, he kind of goes back in to the police station and asks for a receipt.
Yes.
Because there is... Throughout the movie, if there's a through line at all, and it is one of these late 60s melodramas, essentially, with in a lot of cases it was bike movies or road movies. In this case, it's, as we said, stock car racing or figure eight racing. But it's all this, everyone is incredibly serious. No, I don't think there's a joke in it. I mean, there's, Sid Haig's flamboyant and full of braggadocio, but he's not exactly a wisecracker, He's silly and goofy at moments, like Sid Haig is wont to be, but there isn't a lot of humor in it. Everyone is burdened with either a sense of self-importance or a sense of ambition or a sense of, sort of just wanting to do it their way and win again, essentially.
But there is this through line that is indicated of them all owing something to Brian Donlevy's character, Grant Willard. So they're all sort of, it's not quite like they've sold their soul, but there is that kind of, Ellen Burstyn has a line, right, about he owns me body and soul or something like that. So it's not implicit that Grant Willard is sort of a satanic or a Faustian character, but there's sort of that, like Jack Hill's playing with that, right?
Definitely. And yeah, Ellen Burstyn, who's credited here as Ellen McRae, this is before she met and married Mr. Burstyn, apparently. One of the few actresses, well, I'm sure that there are many. If I say this out loud, somebody's immediately going to say, well, what about this person? But she, to me, is one of the few actresses where after they get married, they change their name and then just kept the married name. Even after her husband died, she was Ellen Burstyn from then on out. But these early roles, she was Ellen McRae.
Yeah.
Fellow Detroiter, Ellen McRae, by the way. She has another line where she talks about the cars owning them, just how much they're invested into the vehicles.
Yeah.
And that always takes me aback, just to think about how much they owe when it comes to these vehicles, and they really just can't get out very easily. Because how would you describe her husband in this? Because he's an interesting character, even though she and Rick seem to kind of hook up a little bit in the movie. I would say that she's married to this other guy, correct?
Oh, no, she's definitely, she's the wife of Ed McLeod, who is the next level up. He's like the winner. So you have Sid Haig, Hawk Sidney, who is sort of the winner of the demolition derby, essentially. And then you have George Washburn playing Ed McLeod, who is the leading light in the next step up kind of races, track races, more traditional kind of track, round and round a circle kind of races. And everyone is sort of wanting to, or vying for position to be his backup, his sort of wingman. And in the end, a sort of three-pronged rivalry kind of bounces back between the three of them. But yeah, he is very, very focused on the car and on winning and on being who he is and on moving up and so on and so forth. Whereas Ellen, who seems to have some knowledge and considerable skill at building engines, and seems to, when we first meet them, to be working with him and quite happy with the life. And, she's wearing the overalls and she's got the welding mask on, and she's somewhere along the line in the movie, actually, she's disenchanted with it all. And like you say, that leads to a sequence where her and Rick seem to get together on the sand dunes in yet another gloriously photographed sequence. But then the next time we see them, Ed is saying to his wife, Ellen Burstyn, saying, look, I'm going to give this all up, and let's have that family we talked about, and let's take that vacation we talked about, and I can miss a race, and da-da-da-da-da. Which I guess is meant to set up the ending as being more tragic even than it would be normally, because there's some idea that they are reconciling. But it's all done in very small scenes with not a huge amount of dialogue, so therefore you're left to fill in the pieces. I think you're left to fill in. It's almost like Jack Hill after a certain point is like, well, we need to weave some of these storylines in with each other, but that's not really the focus of the movie. It's sort of secondary, I think.
I want to talk about the pacing in the movie while we're kind of in the nascent discussion here, because the movie is 90 minutes long.
Yeah.
But it's got, so I would think that a movie like this would run 70 minutes, but I'm glad they took it to 90 minutes because it really gives it room to breathe. And there are these moments, these quieter moments that this film has, quieter in quotes, because I'm thinking of that scene on the dunes where they're doing the dune buggies and everything. Not necessarily the quietest thing in the world, but it is a moment of reprieve from the track. And there are all these little moments where we are away from the track and we have these human moments between them. And it gives the film a really nice flavor and a really nice pace to it, where we aren't, this isn't just race. There are these moments away from the track where we get this human interaction. I'm thinking especially of like Beverly Washburn's character and just some of the moments that she and Rick Bowman have together, where they have these conversations, especially towards the end when he's about to do his big race. And those are these nice, quiet moments, the moments that Ellen has. Whenever she is on screen, she really brings more gravitas to the situation.
Yeah, definitely. And I think rather than being plot driven, it's almost character driven in the sense that each of the characters in the film, and it's a very sparsely populated film. There really is, it really is sort of the main 5 or 6 characters. We don't even get to know much about Ed McLeod except that he's a racer. So, and he's married to Ellen. So it's really just sort of the top 5. And each of them represent a different thing. Grant Willard obviously sort of represents the moneyed overlord who doesn't actually participate in any of the dangerous driving, or even maybe he doesn't even have the skill to. But he is the puppet master, or he is the sort of Machiavellian, if I can be overly pompous about it. But he's the guy kind of pushing and pulling them in different directions. And he does. Like, he is playing to their egos and their ambition every step of the way to get what he wants, right down to the very last race. And then, Dick Davalos as Rick Bowman represents the, laser-eyed, this is what I want, this is what I'm going for, I will succeed, no one's going to get in my way, nothing's more important than this guy.
But it's so funny when he starts, he is just such a wanderer. I think that he's probably, he definitely is very good at drag racing, but he's given, I like how they just come up and say like, oh, there's this guy and he wants to race. He doesn't really have like a backstory that we get right up front. It takes a little while to kind of get it, but it's kind of like once Grant pushes him onto that path, then to your point, he is laser focused, but he always has to do things his way. The whole idea of him going out and racing the first time and just it's a disaster, and you would think, okay, maybe that might put him off racing, and then for a moment it looks like it does, but no, he is very determined then, like, how dare anything defeat me? I'm going to master this new thing that has been put in front of me.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, when we first meet him, as you say, he's a drag racer, and he's a guy who's racing for pink slips, which is sort of how he comes in to, or how he comes to be known by Grant Willard, who is out there kind of betting on the drag racing. And then one of his lackeys comes up and says, but this guy wants to race for the car.
Can I say one of his lackeys, but who is obviously voiced by Sid Haig? I love that it's this this ADR of Sid Haig's voice in there. I mean, there's a couple moments in this film, like there's a moment when there's a doctor talking to Rick, and they never show the doctor's mouth, and it is obviously another actor that's just overdubbed them.
Yeah, of course.
But it's filmmaking on the cheap, so what are you going to do? I love it that they do it that way.
No, definitely, and I kind of wanted to get to that as well, because I think it's the guerrilla nature of it and the low budget nature of it kind of is an interesting juxtaposition with the ultimately more artistic result. But anyway, we'll get to that. But Sid Haig represents the showboater, the hot dog, the guy, like I say, is full of braggadocio and showing off and ego and id and all the rest of it, thinks he can have anything he wants. But he's not, and it's not so much about the racing for him in the way that it is for Rick. Because even later on in the film where he loses, he's still dancing up on the bar and trying to pull the women. Like, it's more for him about that, what he gets from it immediately, which is the attention and the ego, more than it is Rick, who seems to be playing more of a long game. He wants to kind of, well, I'm going to race this thing, then I'm going to go to this next race, then I'm going to beat this guy, and he's got more of a focus on the actual doing of it, you know, and even when it's obvious when Sid Haig sees him in the junkyard and Rick's doing his building his car and putting stuff together on his car. We're aware throughout the movie that Rick Bowman knows far more what he's doing in terms of like putting a car together and building a car and other things like, and being more passionate and interested in it than necessarily Hawk Sidney is, or at least that's what I take from it. And then Ellen McLeod is I suppose the woman with substance, let's say, the woman with balls, the woman with spunk, as they used to say back in the day, but also who feels, you know, has this nagging sensation that maybe she should be doing something herself and not being a slave or a part of this whole other thing that she's being dragged along with her husband and everything. And then there's Beverly Washburn, who is she's the naive ingenue, you know, the naive, sympathetic, literally wide-eyed party girl who wants to love her man, but he won't love her back, kind of thing, I guess.
Well, and her character could be just such a throwaway character. I mean, she starts off with Hawk Sidney, and it seems like she might just be interested in who the winner is, and, you know, kind of be like I don't want to say like a buckle bunny, but, you know, just like who's the next person who's going to take home the trophy. I'll go home with them. I'm part of the prize. And at first she kind of seems like that, but then she has much more of a role than just being that eye candy and arm candy for who the winner is. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And in fact, she becomes the emotional core of the third act, really. Right. Not that the film breaks down into acts necessarily, but certainly the third part of the film, she's she's kind of the one everyone else is sort of fucked up or has their own ego or whatever, you know. She's just asking very human questions of very human needs and life and reality and all those other things, and is either brushed aside, ignored, mistreated, or whatever, you know. And so she becomes sort of the emotional core of that last part of the film. And Beverly Washburn is tremendous in the film, that, you know, and in fact all the actors are. There isn't it's also funny for a low budget film. There isn't a, you know, bad spoke in the wheel, as it were. There isn't a bad performance. I don't think it all kind of fits together and feels very believable to me.
And I have to say, Beverly Washburn is just cute as a button. She just is so adorable in this film. And I kind of fell in love with her with Spider Baby, obviously, where she plays such a different role. And I was really so happy to see her. I mean, she has done so many roles over the years, but just to see that in a year's time, still working with Hill in this film, that she brought such a different character to the screen.
And I don't know, just because they have the same last name, was she married or related to George Washburn, who plays Ed McLeod? I've no idea.
That's a good question. Yeah, you would think with two Washburns on the cast that they would definitely have some sort of relationship going on.
Yeah, so she is the sister of George Washburn.
Okay.
I would imagine the younger sister. So 13 years between them. He was born in 1930. She was born in 1943. And so she is the much younger sister of George Washburn, who plays Ed McLeod, Ellen Burstyn's husband in the film. So the budget nature of it, or the way it's shot, anyone who's sort of seen a bunch of Jack Hill's films, and in fact I was also watching the Swinging Cheerleaders, because that was another one of the Arrow Blu-rays I got last year, and we did a bit of a Jack Hill day and watched a few of his films. He is very, definitely good at pacing, editing, pushing the story forward, but his films are definitely sort of rough around the edges. They're clearly shot on the hoof and filmed where he can and when he can, and not without care. There's clearly care in there, and there's clearly talent in there, but there's also an effective use of budget. Like, he just, you know, he knows that, if I've got this swanky Rolls Royce or whatever it is in the case of like coffee or something for a day. I'm going to shoot the hell out of it, and this will be happening, and that'll be happening, and da 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 da. But then we're going to skip on to the next thing, and let's keep the pace up and let's keep it going. So he knows how to kind of make a scrappy film look way better than it has any right to, if that makes any sense.
No, it totally does. I mean, to make Switchblade Sisters this kind of dystopian, futuristic world rather than just a movie about, girls in prison and girl gangs and stuff. I mean, that takes a whole lot of guts to be able to pull that off.
Yeah, he sort of epitomizes what I've always said about B movies, grindhouse movies, low budget movies, call them what you will. And that is that the good ones always have something else sort of beating throughout them or going throughout them or sort of permeating the exploitation nature of them. That and Jack Hill is one of those guys. Like, you can watch one of his movies, and even if it's about stock car racing or if it's about revenge, just a simple revenge film, or if it's about cheerleaders, or if it's about whatever, he's whipping in. He's clearly an intelligent person, clearly a well-read person, clearly a thoughtful person, and is even in a film like Swinging Cheerleaders, puts all that idea of radicalization and politics and what was going on in college campuses across the country and all the rest of it into this movie that's called The Swinging Cheerleaders. just as the same way that this one, Pit Stop, sort of does have a kind of, like I say, sort of a Faustian undertone to it to some extent, and certainly has that idea of kind of God's lonely man aspect to it as well, I think.
Yeah, though it seems like our main character kind of wants that loneliness. I don't know if it's just an inability to connect with other people or just no desire to connect with other people. And I think that's one of the reasons why he makes a compelling protagonist, even though he's, at the end of the day, he might be a dislikable protagonist. I mean, especially that kind of stark ending that we get, it kind of leaves you, at least for me, a little bit gobsmacked.
Yeah, and I think it's, again, that's another thing where Jack Hill has made a conscious decision. He's saying, we could give you the ending that you're expecting, which is, and I don't really want to spoil it too much because one of the reasons why I wanted to cover this, and I was glad it was on your list when we wrote to each other, was that this is one that, because a lot of these Blu-ray companies and DVD companies release, 5 or 6 movies a month nowadays. Like, Arrow has new releases all the time. And a lot of the time you're paying upwards of sort of $28 for them, and you're not always getting a movie that's worth $28. Even if it's stacked full of features, it's not always worth it. That's nothing against Arrow or Blue Underground or any of these people. It's just that a lot of these movies, they're really not worth the money, even with the beautiful packaging. This movie, on the other hand, deserves to be watched, cherished, loved, seen, talked about, played, revived, whatever it is. So I definitely wanted to talk about it. So I don't really want to spoil the ending. But let's just say that there's a choice at the end, and he could have decided to do what any one of us would have done in that situation and stepped back and gone, well, hang on a second, this is all getting too serious, this all has consequences, my rise to fame or power or money or whatever is not necessarily worth what just happened, so let me reconsider this, let me comfort my woman who is crying on the couch, let me try and see if I can somehow do right, make better, whatever. And Jack Hill just says, no, we're not having that ending at all. We're having the ending that it's stark, it's surprising, it's defiantly on Hollywood, and it's also though sadly in a weird way possibly the more realistic ending, and it's also making a comment on ambition and success, certainly in America, because lot of people, and this is maybe where we tie it into the politics right now, but a lot of people certainly of that ilk don't get where they get without bodies being strewn along the highway behind them, you know?
Right. Yeah, he doesn't care about who he has to step on to get to that next level.
And this is sort of the ultimate example of that. This is the most shocking example of that, and how far are you willing to go? And what's funny is that the whole movie, we've not seen a lot of money exchange hands. It's not like every time he wins a race, he's getting a huge suitcase and lots of medals or anything, you know? Or not medals, awards and things. And he's not getting, suitcases full of cash. It's not like... If he was suddenly dressing better or driving better cars or, being sucked into the limelight and the riches and all the rest of it, which another movie might do, it wouldn't be more forgivable, but it might be more understanding. Because you would see the rewards. However, he makes the decision at the end of the movie without really any certainty. He knows that the guy that he drives away with, if another better, younger person comes along, will throw him to the curb, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, and a lot of people warn him against Grant and just know, oh, you're the new guy. You know, it seems like this is definitely a long history that Grant has. And, I mean, Hawk is another one of the drivers. And Grant just is like, okay, whatever. You know, he doesn't necessarily abandon Hawk, but he plunks his money into our hero. And it's a pattern that has been going on for a long time. And when it comes to the winnings, I mean, I'm sure that Grant is getting a great portion of that. And it seems like our main character is putting his money back into the car, and that he's coming up with ideas how to make his car better and just constantly upgrading. I mean, one of the things that we haven't touched on is this whole idea of after he kind of tanks the first time, that he goes back to the junkyard where he was going to buy this vehicle and ends up working there and kind of paying off his debt, and then, you know, using those parts from the junkyard to work on his next car. And he's just constantly striving, constantly pushing. Once he gets on that path, there's nothing that's going to stop him. And so he's really working hard to make that next vehicle the better one. And then, you know, once that gets crashed, he works on the next vehicle. So he is constantly trying to improve, which, hey, great for him, but sometimes he is way too single-minded when it comes to his ambitions.
Yeah, but it's some of those wonderful sequences in the junkyard that are fantastically sort of beatnik in their own way, and they're also, for someone like myself who is a huge admirer of Americana from that era, you know, I could watch those cars, whether they're junkers or whether they're brand new, either drive around or be put back together or just be filmed, on a crane as they fly across the sun or whatever it is. Like, I could watch that all day and all night. Like, to me, it's the perfect combination to me of junkyards, which I kind of romanticize, those cars, which I romanticize, that era, which I romanticize, and then cinema and film and all the rest of it, and then the music, because there's always this it's bluesy, but it's kind of early, rough, grungy, electric, I guess kind of late 60s, almost Hendrixy influenced guitar, and it's pretty incredible, those sequences. They are kind of like porn for me.
That guitar, even though it's kind of out of time being 69, but then again, the film is almost out of time being shot in black and white. You would think that it might be a color film by this time, but that guitar, that crunchy, gritty guitar, the kind of guitar that you can kind of sink your teeth into, it reminds me a lot of like a Link Ray guitar. And to hear that grunge over these scenes really is appropriate for me.
Yeah, it's kind of where almost like distorted, twangy surf guitar meets blues music. It's sort of weird, and it's also like everything in this movie is tactile. It has a surface you can feel. It burns, it creaks, it bangs, it like everything about it. It just from the music to the lighting to the everything has a texture, and it's just remarkable. I just want to constantly praise it because essentially, like we're saying, it's a movie about a bunch of egotistical drag racers, you know what I mean, or stock car racers, who and the story that seems to be driving it at the beginning of the film is the destructive rivalry between Richard Davalos' character and Sid Haig's character, which culminates in Sid Haig, and I came very close to weeping when I first saw this, destroys one of these cars with a massive...
Oh, yeah.
Is it a pickaxe or a hammer?
I'm not sure.
Axe.
It's pretty dark.
It's an axe. I think it's just a regular fire axe, but he's got a big axe, and he just takes it to this car and absolutely destroys it. And I'm sure back then it was the junker of its day. I'm sure it was just something that they wheeled off a junkyard so he could just take an axe to it, and they thought nothing of it. But like those cars in the A-Team that you could always tell they were the cars they were going to flip over because they were the kind of very bog standard dragged off a junkyard because they knew they were going to throw it up a ramp and blow it up, I'm sure it was one of those cars, but nonetheless, to us, with our contemporary modern eyes, it was a glorious piece of machinery, and he takes a fucking axe to it. And not only that, but it's a stark and scary sequence because he has no problem beating Dick Davalos up, Rick Bowman up, but also he's destroying this car with no care that Jolene, Beverly Washburn's character, is inside it. And he's smashing the roof, and he's smashing the windscreen and the side things. And, he's all fired up, and he's fired up with having had a massive failure and bruise to his ego and anger, and he's seeing red and everything else, but it's really no excuse. And he does kind of win us back later on in the movie when he decides to kind of be a team player. But it's interesting to note that when he does become a team player, all the wind and bravado is sucked right out of him, and he becomes a secondary, if not tertiary character.
Yeah, he just fades right into the background after that, which is hard for Sid Haig to do, and especially in this movie. And that scene that you're talking about, that is, this is a 30-year-old Sid Haig. He looks like a baby in this film.
Right. A beautifully gangly, pockmarked, wiry-haired baby.
Oh, yes. It's just great seeing him in this, and the black and white photography does wonders for him. And when he takes that axe to the car, then you see the Sid Haig that you're going to see in 40, 50 years, the scary Sid Haig.
Yeah.
And it is just it's a scene from a horror movie, and I really appreciate the way that they shoot this. I mean, in the dark, and the way that, yes, people are in danger, and he really does not have the concern, and he has that manic glee in his eyes. It looks like he looks like Freddy or one of the slashers. It just seems like this is what he lives for.
Well, it's 15 years before even Jack Nicholson would take an axe and gleefully destroy a hotel. So it definitely has that aspect to it. And I think that the high contrast black and white does wonders for Sid Haig's maniacal teeth.
Yes.
Which that needs to be, like, there needs to be a kind of Bonzo Dog Doodah Band style band that is called Sid Haig's Maniacal Teeth. Or it sounds like a Bonzo Dog song, doesn't it? Sid Haig's Maniacal Teeth.
It does.
But that needs to happen. So get on that, whoever's listening who plays mad instruments. But yeah, that his teeth and eyes, the whites of his eyes and the whites of his teeth, and the axe coming down onto the camera is very effective, thoroughly menacing.
That beautiful aquiline nose of his, the way that it just is highlighted there in some of those stark contrast black and white shots. It's just like, wow, this guy is so striking. I can really see why he became what he became.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, it's just, I don't really know what more to say other than it's a very wonderful, challenging film. I think that Richard Davalos, I was going to say earlier, but he is kind of 50%, and obviously this is probably an easy comparison to make because he was also in a movie with him, but he's 50% James Dean and sort of 50% a young Richard Burton in a really weird way. I don't know why, but I'm getting like a young Burton vibe just because of the... Have you ever seen Look Back in Anger?
I have not.
Okay, so Richard Burton did a film, of a black and white film of the famous play, and of course I'm going to forget the play right now, Look Back in Anger, which was one of the very early, what was called a kitchen sink drama in Britain.
Right.
Basically a working class story.
John Osborne.
John Osborne, that's it. Right. John Osborne is the writer.
Who ended up going... I remember Look Back in Anger came up several times when I was doing an episode about Get Carter, because I think John Osborne is one of the heavies in that film.
Yes, he is. Yes. Yeah. He does show up in that. But if you like... Weirdly enough, if you like Pit Stop... Look Back in Anger has a lot of similarity to it, certainly in the photography. I mean, all the accents are totally different, of course. There's even a guy in it with a very strong Welsh accent, so look forward to that. But whereas this film is about what do you do and how far do you go to achieve your ambitions in a very American way, if I can say that. Look Back in Anger, although it's also about a relationship and it's about the trials and tribulations of being working class in London and trying to make it work and da-da-da-da-da. It's also, in a weird way, our leading character in Look Back in Anger has an ambition, or certainly has a passion, that will never go past the hobby stroke I do it on a Saturday night style thing. He's a jazz trumpeter. And it only, he lives for that like 40 minutes that he's on stage on a Saturday night in a smoky cabin in the city that they're living in, which I think is London. I might be wrong on that. It might be up north, but I think it's London. And he kind of lives for that, but will never fulfill that ambition. And is a great talker and a great kind of stomper of his feet and slammer of his fists, but, he's all talk and no trousers, as they say, whereas Dick Davalos is like all trousers. In fact, I think he probably has about 6 lines in the film, doesn't he?
Yeah, he definitely talks softly and carries a big stick.
Yeah, so I would anyone who's seen Look Back in Anger and is looking sort of for I'm not saying it's an American counterpart, but it's certainly got a lot of the same kind of aspects to it. But if you like that kind of filmmaking, I would strongly suggest seeing Pit Stop, and vice versa. If you love Pit Stop or these kind of movies, I would strongly suggest seeing Look Back in Anger. It was one of those that I came across when I was in my teens. I almost think my friend John Wallace had a VHS copy of it. And for some reason, it was just one of those we watched all the time. But similarly intense, and has that thing where I think it's a Kerouac line, isn't it? About seeing a person and seeing them burn. I think that's a Kerouac line. I think it's from On the Road. I think it might be how he describes Moriarty. But if you see it, when you see that person, it's almost like he's burning. And Richard Davalos has that in this movie in the same way that Richard Burton does in Look Back in Anger. But that's just something I've come up with right now as we're talking.
It's funny. Look Back in Anger seems like a good angry young man movie to watch, especially when you're growing up. And I guess for me, mine was another movie that you kind of referenced by saying God's Lonely Man. Mine was Taxi Driver, just watching that, almost on a loop. And it was just like one of those things where you're just like, yes, I can completely understand Travis because he is so disenfranchised. And I really feel that that's what Rick Bowman is in this film as well, is just he's out on his own, and I can see if you were a young man wanting to latch onto a character like that, this would be a good character to latch onto.
Yeah, I would agree. First of all, I'm a huge fan of Taxi Driver. I mean, when anyone says like, "What's your favorite film?" It's either Taxi Driver, Apocalypse Now, or Evil Dead 2. I think the difference being is that at a certain point, Rick becomes an irredeemable character. Mm-hmm. Whereas Travis, first of all, Travis has PTSD along with a fairly low IQ. He's not all together there when we first meet him or even at the end. But at least he's wrestling with something and trying to be better in a weird way. And yes, okay, he goes far too extreme the other way in terms of like trying to sort out the world's problems. But Travis has something that I could and still latch onto all the time. Whereas I'm not sure that I could really, apart from wanting Rick Bowman's hair, and to be able to wear all black in quite the same stylish, cool way that he does. I don't know that there's anything in Rick Bowman that I would like to see in myself.
That hair is something else. I really love it. It reminds me a little bit of like an Eddie Cochran type of do.
Definitely. I mean, he's a total throwback teddy boy. I mean, if you had told me this was made in 1959, it would make sense to me. There's no aspect that the Summer of Love even happened. Like there's no indication in this film that of any civil rights. There's no indication in this movie of the hippie movement. There's the Southern race car driver who shows up at the end and who makes a few comments, but really, ultimately, the movie is not like you said. It's out of time. It could be 1949, 1959, 1969. As long as they have as long as you have cars, it could really be any time and place. I mean, by the time you kind of get to the 70s and 80s, no, he would be completely out of place. But certainly for the era that it takes place in, it could be any number of years. That this is not placed in 1969 by anything. There's not even really any popular music. Most of the popular music in the movie, or popular music that's hinted on in the movie, in the juke bar where they all go to dance after the game, after the races, all sounds to me like it could be either late 50s, early 60s rockabilly, rock and roll kind of stuff. So,
well, it's very fitting that Brian Donlevy is in this film. He seems to be the most natural person in here, because this feels like a 50s film so much of the time. This feels like, this could have been on a double bill with High School Confidential, which
right.
is really a strange thing, because so many of Jack Hill's films were contemporary. I mean, to have Coffee, a blaxploitation film, one of the best blaxploitation films, one of the greatest films, in my opinion, to ever be made, to have that right there in the middle of the blaxploitation wave, it's definitely right there. You've got your pimps and all this kind of stuff, but this one feels so out of time. In other films, I would say, like, even Spider Baby feels like that's kind of a throwback to an earlier era. I wouldn't have been surprised if, Bud Abbott came knocking at the door. And in that
right.
one, having Lon Chaney Jr. as kind of the, I don't want to call it stunt casting, but kind of your throwback character. And I think Dunlevy brings that to this film, where it feels like he could have made this 10 or maybe 15 years prior to where he's at.
Yeah, completely. And I don't even know, I mean, you might know better than me, Mike, but in terms of trends in filmmaking, kind of like the way Roger Corman used to look at things, and he'd be like, oh, well, you know, drag racing is popular now, so let's do 5 or 6 drag racing movies, or bike movies are popular now, let's do 5 or 6 bike movies. Sort of, I don't get a feeling that that these kind of stock car racing was in the zeitgeist either at the end of the 60s, or were they? I mean, I don't know. Maybe you'd know more than I would on that.
No, I'm not really sure. I know that there have been other exploitative films about racing, and there were definitely more in the 70s than there were in other eras. I mean, I know that, you know, Six Pack, of course, and Stroke Race, one of the greatest films. That's and I say that one sarcastically as opposed to Coffee, because I really do truly feel like that's a fantastic film.
Well, Coffee is tremendous.
Coffee is. Stroke Race is not, but it is a joy to watch just because it is such a disaster.
Yeah.
But those were kind of ushering in the acceptance of NASCAR, I would think, into more mainstream culture. But yeah, definitely in the 70s, I mean, Heart Like a Wheel, The High Riders.
Grease Lightning?
Grease Lightning,
which is another... I actually saw that for the first time when they did the Pam Grier retrospective at the Lincoln Center in New York. They did a full weekend, 3 days of Pam Grier films, and I was there for as many as I could afford and watch, because a lot of them overlapped, because they took over 3 of the screens there. And I saw Grease Lightning on the big screen for the first time then, which is a few years ago now, and I subsequently own it. I think it's a really great biopic. It's a really good, solid movie, and it's obviously unique because him and Pam Grier were dating at the time, and they are both tremendous in the film, and I love it. I think it's a great film, and it's much later. It comes, what is it, 78? 79, something like that. It's past the sort of blaxploitation era, but it's where it's where they are starting, the African American community who are making those films are stepping out and starting to tell their stories. So stories of African Americans, like this was the first African American race car driver, right, in Grease Lightning, and they're starting to tell like their history and their stories, which is awesome. But also just the way it's filmed and the way it's acted, I loved it.
Yeah, no, it was terrific, and I would say. So, yeah, as far as going back to the original question, as far as what the prevalence of stock car racing or racing films were, I mean, I think they've always been with us. I can't really say there was ever a strong movement of the subgenre, you know, like over the last. Yeah, go ahead. No,
I was just going to say, the only reason I brought it up was because it's sort of like the movie itself feels like it's 10 years late.
Yes.
In the way it's made. It almost feels like it's 10 years late or 10 years early, maybe, in its subject matter. I mean, yes, okay, I guess it comes around the same time as something like Easy Rider, but they're both telling, while they are both sort of, men on a journey, I guess, but like, or internal journey as much as they are external journey, they're completely different films and have completely different messages. And one is very much of the 60s and the hippie era and America and all that. And this is a massive throwback, which I think maybe means it works better now than it did then. I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I wasn't alive then. But I mean, I imagine going to see it then, it would have felt a little passé, maybe, just because they'd already had 10 years of these kind of movies. I don't know.
Well, I don't think it's any coincidence that when you talk about Jack Hill films that a lot of people just forget about Pit Stop. You know, they will definitely talk about Spider Baby, which remarkably still holds up after all these years. I mean, that's the thing about Jack Hill's films is that I think almost all of them hold up today. I mean, I would have no problem throwing in the Swinging Cheerleaders into my DVD player tomorrow and watching it. So they all, you know, and seeing Spider Baby with an audience that I did in Chicago a few years ago, people were eating it up. And you had a lot of people who were seeing it for the first time, and a lot of people who were seeing it for the 30th time, and everyone had a good time with that film. But people would go from Spider Baby and then jump right into the Filipino films. And yeah, the Pit Stop was in there, guys. But obviously he was really, to me, hitting them out of the park when it came to, the Big Dollhouse, the Big Birdcage, Coffee, Foxy Brown, Swinging Cheerleaders, Switchblade Sisters, and I think it's just tough for people to wrap their heads around this one other film that kind of goes under the radar a lot. And I think part of it is because of what we've talked about, which is this hero who is not necessarily the most likable person in the world. I mean, it's our hero in Coffee. She wins at the end, even though she kind of loses by having this revenge and losing everything by the end. But most of these people are winners by the end of the day, and our hero of Pit Stop is too much of a winner. He that's the only thing that matters to him.
Yeah. And exactly, and that's sort of the point I was making earlier, is that we sort of, in a weird way, live now in a world, and I'm not just referencing who happens to be the president, but we certainly, once the 80s kicked in and then the 90s, we're seeing a result of a generation of people who believe that is how success is gained, and that is how that the American dream is despite everybody else, rather than inclusive of everybody else. Or rather, maybe we're seeing a world now where it's 50-50, and 50% of people believe that you step on every neck you possibly can, and 50% of people go, well, hang on, can't we all kind of achieve something? Even, because I think their interpretation of the American dream was, for some people, the American dream is just to be able to have a roof over their head, go to work every day, have a family, and be happy. It doesn't have to be, I have to be number one, me. It can be more human than that, and it can be more inclusive than that. And so, maybe I'm going off on one, but you know what I mean? Like, there is that aspect of we're seeing that generation of people who believe that. And it's no mistake that movies like Wolf of Wall Street and stuff like that are being made right now,
Exactly.
The After Movie Diner with Jon Cross will return right after this.
We'll do it live. F*** it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live. Hi, I'm Jay Mayo.
And I'm Marie.
Shut up!
I'm Marie.
Shut up!
I'm Marie Forster.
And we are co-hosts of Hold the Mayo podcast.
Hold the mayo.
Hold the Mayo!
All right, give me ham on 5, hold the mail.
We're two local comedians, and here on Hold the Mayo, we talk about all the different things that are going on in our daily lives.
Or in your case, your pathetic dating life.
Or in your case, your obsession with pizza.
Or in your case, your Gatham for Statham.
Yeah? Well, at least I'm not obsessed with Guy Fieri.
At least I'm a gang leader.
No, you're not. You're just always trying to overthrow invisible gangs.
No, I'm cool in the gang.
No, oh my God, the puns are the worst.
Mayonnaise, really? That stuff is for sandwiches.
Listen, you guys can find us all across the internet. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, and everywhere else that podcast can be found. You can also find us all across social media. We're on Twitter at Hold the Mayo Pod, Instagram at Hold the Mayo Podcast, and of course, we have a Facebook fan page, facebook.com/Hold the Mayo Podcast.
Don't forget, you can also find Jay crying on his couch every single night.
Thank you so much.
F***ing thing sucks.
And just end it with a fart.
Here's what some people are saying about the Projection Booth podcast.
The Projection Booth is single-handedly the greatest film podcast you could ever listen to or could possibly want.
Top notch. 5 stars. This has quickly become one of my favorite film-related podcasts. Always interesting.
A completely unpretentious yet fully comprehensive look at films from all genres.
The Projection Booth podcast, with new episodes available every week at projectionboothpodcast.com.
You're listening to the sweet sounds of the After Movie Diner. Support us at patreon.com/After Movie Diner. Or I'll punch you in the teats. Rate and review us on iTunes, Earthling.
Yeah, I saw an interesting cartoon, not to devolve too much here, but I saw a funny cartoon recently of equality to a conservative and equality to a liberal. And there was 3 boys who are standing by a fence trying to look at a ball game. And in one picture, each one of the boys has a box, and they all step on the box. Everybody gets a box. Great. But one of the boys is short, one of the boys is medium-sized, one of the boys is tall. The boy who was tall didn't even need the box to be able to look over the fence, and the short guy with the one box can't do anything. And then when it comes to equality to a liberal, it was that the boxes are distributed so much that all 3 of them can see over the fence. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's kind of where my dream is at, is that people who can't get up, we can help those people. People who are tall help the people who are short. So
kind of like you guesting on my podcast. Just to bring it full circle. But no, in all seriousness, though, I've said time and time again, and will continue to say, that one of the greatest things that has ever come out of me doing the show is the community I've found myself in, and are the people I've been able to interact with because of it. More than any, I don't make any money off it. I don't get any notoriety from it, nothing like that. It's more about the community you find yourself in and the people I've had the chance to befriend and interact with. Without wanting to sound too sappy, I've said that multiple times. That's genuinely one of the best things to have come out of it. And certainly, like you say, far more my vision of a utopia than this idea that we should all be somehow billionaires, because economically that doesn't even work. I mean, unless we want to start printing money, and maybe that's the way we're going. Who knows? But yes, back to Jack Hill. It is literally an interesting pit stop in his career. It is unlike sort of anything else that he's doing at the time. It doesn't have the exploitation elements, for example, that his other films do to some extent. It doesn't feel to me like he's working on a principle of, well, make sure you get some boobs in there and make sure you get some violence in there. Yes, he has to show the racing, and yes, the positioning of the cameras was particularly dangerous and guerrilla-like and a little crazy in order to capture the visceral feel of the figure eight racing. So there is that slight exploitation element in it, but there's not really any unnecessary fighting. There's not any unnecessary bloodletting, and there's not any unnecessary nudity in the film. So you can't really call it an exploitation film.
To me, this almost feels like it would be a great double feature with Two Lane Blacktop. Yes. I can't say that Pit Stop is as existential as Two Lane Blacktop, but in Two Lane Blacktop, and I guess to your point with Easy Rider, I mean, there's that line at the end of Easy Rider, like, we did it. No, Billy, we lost. We blew it, and that's kind of the feeling that you get at the end of Two Lane Blacktop, and that to me is kind of the feeling that you get by the end of Pit Stop as well. I think those films would really go well together. Yeah,
and almost you could look at Pit Stop, therefore, if you followed it on, like if it was the second film in the double bill, as this idea of Dick Davalos' character being maybe a little bit of a nihilist, in the sense that, you could also look at it as a bit as a sociopath, but like a little bit of a nihilist. In other words, it's all lost. Nobody cares about us, so I'm going to do this for me. There isn't anyone tending the light at the end of the tunnel, to use a Hunter S. Thompson phrase, while we're dancing all around the 60s and beatnik writing. There isn't anyone tending the light at the end of the tunnel, so I might as well just go all in. Like, this is what I'm going to do and screw everyone else. In a fairly kind of single-minded, nihilistic way.
Exactly.
Which would follow on nicely, I guess, from from the end of Easy Rider or Two Lane Blacktop. But yeah, I mean, it's funny. I have like a really deep rooted love of like travel movies, car movies, walking movies, like lonely people movies. You know, I love Into the Wild. I love Easy Rider. I love Two Lane Blacktop. I love Vanishing Point. I love this film. I love Taxi Driver. That I find them in a weird way almost soothing, even though nothing in them is ever soothing. Even though it's sort of a world in chaos, and there is a guy often navigating that world who is often sort of numb to it, whether it's the numbness brought about by massive amounts of amphetamines in Vanishing Point, or whether it's numb to the rest of the world because of blind ambition in the case of Pit Stop, or just numb to the world because the world seems too much in the case of Taxi Driver. But I am, or even look at Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now is sort of about a guy. Yes, he's surrounded by people. Yes, he's surrounded by war and craziness and madness and all the rest of it. But it's all in that voiceover, you know. And they're the movies I seem to be massively drawn to. So take from that what you will. And I have to say that in the noise and fury we're seeing around us at the moment, I'm very much, and I know how dangerous it is to kind of step back and say, I'm not going to engage with it, because to some extent it needs to be engaged with. I'm not being lazy and I'm not being uninvolved, but I am more inclined to step as far back from the noise and madness as I can, just to kind of try and figure it out and try and see where we're being conned and where we're actually in danger and where it is all just stupid. Like, I have to kind of step back and try and sift my way through it rather than just react all the time. I think too many people are just reacting. And I get it, I understand it, but it's not, because the right thing would be to put the fucking brakes on for 5 minutes and go, okay, let's actually look at this.
Right. Yeah, you can't have a breaking news cycle in this world, because it is coming at you 100 miles an hour, to keep with the racing metaphor here. It is just coming at you so much that it is constant breaking. Here's the latest thing. Can you believe what Kellyanne Conway said? Can you believe what Spicer said? Can you believe what Trump said? Look at this trash can fire that happened or this dumpster fire that happened with just this news conference. You know, all of these things. And yeah, they really do need to say, okay, we're going to be much more calm with it. This shouldn't be just react. We really do need to actually form a narrative, because that's going to be the most important thing. We need to have a narrative. We can't just react all the time, because otherwise it ends up being like the middle of the Circle 8, just, you know, cars hurtling at each other. Sometimes they make it through, and sometimes they just smash up completely.
Completely understand. I love the way you wrap that back around into Pit Stop. So I would guess, but you would wholeheartedly endorse this film and urge everyone listening to see it.
Definitely. And you were talking about what you like about podcasting. I like that very much as well. I do really like the sense of community. One of the things that I really appreciate about doing podcasts like this is that ability to reach people who might not have ever even heard of Jack Hill, much less about this particular film, and hopefully expose themselves to a movie like this, where this isn't going to show up, you know, at the local multiplex anytime soon, and it's probably not even going to be streaming on Netflix anytime soon. So this is one of those movies. Go check it out, seek it out, and you will definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, it's currently available to watch right now on Amazon Prime. So you can go and do that if you have Amazon Prime. And normally, if they're available on Amazon Prime, they're also available to rent on Amazon for anyone who doesn't have Prime. but I'm not 100% sure on that because I do have Prime. The Blu-ray at the moment on Amazon appears to be $15, which is well worth it. And yes, you can rent it and own it on Amazon Video if you're doing that as well. There will be links on the site to do all of those things, because if you do any of those things, a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage will be filtered back to the After Movie Diner. So if you've liked listening to us discuss it and you go, you know what, I'm just going to bite the bullet and pick up the Blu-ray, go through the After Movie Diner website and you might give us a small kickback. But yeah, what a fantastic film. And so, Mike, just to wrap it up then in the last few minutes, first of all, was there anything more you wanted to say? And secondly, what's going on with you? What can people expect in the future? And where can people find you?
There's so many questions. Oh, my God.
Just basically vamp for the next 5 minutes. No.
Oh, okay. Well, is there anything else I want to say about this film? No, I think I pretty much covered it all, so I'm pretty good with that. Oh, I did want to say the one thing. The other part of the movie that we didn't touch on that I absolutely love is when he finds kind of his Jedi master and learns from this old timer. I really love that when the old timer's telling him about the corners and the walls and stuff, and just the way that you play the track. I really like that scene for some reason. Even though it's not very visual at all, it's just two guys talking, I just love the patter between the old dude and our main character. Just really a nice scene of dialogue.
Yeah, he learns from him, and then later he learns from Ellen Burstyn a little bit about sort of the weight of things and where to put it in the car and how to speed the car up and things like that, right? There's that bit later on, I think, where she's talking to him about that.
Yeah, all of those are such nice moments, you know. And again, quieter moments in a film about stock car racing, which you would not necessarily expect.
Oh, and one last thing, which I also wanted to mention, and that is the gang that just hang out at the junkyard. The two younger guys and the older dude who's like messily eating a pie or something. Like those guys I absolutely love. And then doesn't she come over, Beverly Washburn comes over to talk to them, and the two younger lads are saying like the old guy's trying to chat you up, and you know there's this sort of, it almost feels improvised. There's this nice little scene of like local people just kind of joking with each other, and I'm always fascinated by those kind of characters.
Well, you talked about how nobody gives a bad performance in the film, and the one, actually, I think it's the two Southern racers that are talking. I think they're the only, like, I won't even call them a false note. It's funny to me to listen to them because they are obviously not professional actors, and to hear them try to act is just, it's so awkwardly funny to me.
Right, yeah, okay. And there are there's certain lines of dialogue that Jack Hill puts in their mouth because they're Southern that also feel a little stilted. Yeah, I'll give you that, yeah.
But again, it's more fun than, like, you know, cringeworthy, I would say.
Yeah. Oh no, definitely. And it certainly benefits again from the fact that there are there's no hippies, there's no African-American character. Like, there's nothing for those Southerners to really, like, do a long diatribe about. Like, you would imagine in a sort of more exploitative film, they would show up as sort of drunk Southern hicks into a world of, like, hippies and civil rights and all the rest of it, and they would be like, you know, gosh darn, look at these crazy people or whatever. You know, there'd be a lot of like sort of very cliched, stilted stuff, which there's a little bit, but not really. It's certainly not the focus of it. And the dude with the beard who is hanging around in the background. In fact, his beard looks like it's stuck on. The guy who informs him that when he gets off the racetrack, having won the race, that they've all gone to hospital. That guy, he is particularly kind of natural, let's say.
Yes.
A little shambolic. But I mean, I kind of, to me, that adds to the realism. I guess I've seen enough of them that like yourself, that when I see a real person in a film, if you see a real person in a big Hollywood film, yes, it completely and utterly jarring and awful. But if you see a real person in one of these kind of like scrappy gonzo guerrilla B movies, it's charming in a weird way.
Exactly.
And
the whole film is pretty charming, I would say.
Oh, it is. It's stunning. Yeah, it's really wonderful and definitely deserves to be. And again, this is where I would utterly praise a company like Arrow or Blue Underground or Vinegar Syndrome, any of them, because while 35% of their output is going to be movies you expect, like the Hellraisers or the Reanimators or the Evil Deads or whatever it is, and 35% of their output is going to be stuff that really should have been left where it was, with all the best will in the world. There is the 35% that are unheralded and unsung masterpieces by filmmakers who should have had much longer and much better careers, and not better careers in terms of quality, but better careers in terms of longevity. And Jack Hill, to some extent, is a bit like, although he made different styles of film completely, he's a bit like John Carpenter. He will never, while lots and lots of people adore and love his films, he will never, certainly on this side of the Atlantic, get the recognition and the artistic critical acclaim that they deserve.
Yeah, that was one thing. In your intro to me, you said that I would like to punch Tarantino in the pants, and
I only said that because one of the things I know about you is you have this, I don't know whether it's a love-hate feud or just a little back and forth with Tarantino's camp.
Well, Tarantino famously helped bring Hill some acclaim a few years, probably more like 20 years ago or a little bit more than that, when he put out Switchblade Sisters on the Rolling Thunder label, VHS label, and then also helped take it around the country and toured around to different theaters. And that was fantastic. And it was one of those moments that there was a time when Tarantino could really help a person's career. We saw that in 1994 with John Travolta, which was kind of gave Travolta new life. And we've seen it with a few other actors, but really, I mean, even Pam Grier he worked with and really helped to inject her back into the mainstream, I would say, though.
Robert Forster.
Exactly.
And even to some extent, Kurt Russell.
Yes.
Because Kurt Russell is now doing more movies a year than he was before he did Death Proof.
Right. And I really wish that Jack Hill would have been one of those filmmakers that he managed to kind of bring out of retirement. I know that Tarantino had talked to Monty Hellman. Tarantino had talked to Jack Hill. These were some of the classic filmmakers that,
Brian Trenchard Smith, of course, is another one who Tarantino's a huge devotee of.
Right. And I know that, Monty Hellman's still making movies, but if there was a time there where they were working on a project together, it's like, okay, Hellman helped produce Reservoir Dogs. And I really wish that Tarantino had managed to do a little bit more for Jack Hill. I don't know if that was Hill's reticence, if it just wasn't the right time, the right place. But I always kind of think, like, what could have been. I really wish that Hill, even if he directed Second Unit on something, would have been fantastic to help him kind of get back out of retirement. Because the guy, now he's old as dirt, but he's very, very vital. I did see him a couple of years ago when, like I said, when Spider Baby played, he was there with the film, and he is a fantastic raconteur. I have read interviews with him before. I've spoken with him before. He is a great director and a great talent, and really can tell stories very well. And I wish that he had the opportunity to make more movies.
No, completely. And, I joke a lot about Tarantino because I'm one of those who say that post kind of Kill Bill 1, I haven't really liked anything he's put out to any great extent. I know a lot of people, which is weird because a lot of people are the other way around. A lot of people love his later stuff, The Inglourious Bastards and Django Unchained and things like that, and think that they're wonderful and epic and incredible. And to me, I'm just like, oh, stop it. In terms of his filmmaking. But also, that's also because I saw Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, especially, and not so much Jackie Brown, because I was aware of where Jackie Brown was coming from when that came out. But Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs, I certainly saw at a time where I didn't have the knowledge of movies that I have now. And there were also films that I don't particularly go back and watch a huge amount. But they were certainly movies, because I was a kid of the late 80s, early 90s. They were obviously going to be influential. They were obviously going to be movies that I saw. I remember going to see Pulp Fiction in 1994, even though I was only 14, with my brother at a midnight screening, sneaking into the cinema because it was an 18 in the UK. My brother backing me up. It was a whole thing. And I remember it being like one of the first big boy movies I saw with like other big boys. You know what I mean? I mean, I'd seen 18s and 15s and things on video on VHS, but I hadn't seen anything in the cinema that came close to something like Pulp Fiction. And obviously now, with a broader knowledge of cinema and having watched a whole bunch more, I can completely and utterly see that the failings I find in his later films are evident there in the earlier ones as well. But cinema is definitely about how you felt when you went in, and what age you were, and the history of it, and all that plays into it. And I also just think that in a weird way, Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, and Jackie Brown and Kill Bill 1 are more just... they're more joyfully entertaining than his later films, where he's really trying to be a filmmaker, and that was his mistake. if that makes any sense. And so, yeah, I kind of fell out of favor with him because of his movies, and because of him when he talks is just awful. But and also Eli Roth. I'll never forgive him for Eli Roth. But
yeah.
But saying all that, like the work he's done for preserving film, the work he's done of highlighting, like you say, the work of Monty Hellman, the work of Brian Trenchard Smith, the work of Jack Hill, B movies, grindhouse movies, second tier films in general, blaxploitation, all that kind of stuff. It's like George Carlin had a comedy bit about the Blues Brothers. He was like fat old white guys singing the blues who are like millionaire actors or whatever. Singing the blues is just fucking embarrassing. Stop it. However, without the Blues Brothers, James Brown, Aretha Franklin, Ray Charles, all these people had huge leases of life because of that movie. Also, it's just a fun, enjoyable fucking movie. It doesn't excuse the fact that Jim Belushi is now one of them, but let's just skirt over that. What I mean is, the end does justify the means, you know what I mean? So, I also think True Romance is just a tremendously good script. But that's where I come out with Tarantino. That's my Tarantino thing. I give him a lot of... I think the New Beverly and Los Angeles, what that does... I know he doesn't run it particularly well. I've heard a lot of the stories behind that. But certainly the movies he's able to screen, certainly the filmmakers he's able to get in. You know, you can argue there wouldn't kind of be an Alamo Draft House or a Landmark Theatre chain or that kind of thing if those movies weren't reintroduced to some extent. And you can also argue that would have happened anyway. But that's kind of where I fall with it.
Mm-hmm. I kind of checked out with him after Pulp Fiction. I wasn't really... I mean, I enjoyed Natural Born Killers, and I kind of enjoyed True Romance, but it's definitely not one that I go back to anytime. But Jackie Brown just didn't do it for me. I think I was turned off so much by the opening where he's using Across 110th Street, and I was just like, how can you use the theme to another movie for the theme for your movie? And then that over the opening visuals from The Graduate, I was just like, yeah, I'm kind of done. And then the fractured time sequence at the end, I was just like, yeah, I understand what's going on. You don't have to show it to me 3 times. This is really kind of a waste. You know, this is cinematic masturbation for me. I really just don't need this.
Right. No, I completely understand those criticisms of Jackie Brown. For me, it's about watching Pam Grier and Robert Forster act.
Yes.
and in a weird way, seeing Samuel L. Jackson like almost be out of his depth. Like, normally Samuel L. Jackson controls a scene. He's in a scene and it's all about him. And it's what he can say and what he can do and how loud he can shout. And it's just, to some extent, he does a very similar shtick in a lot of his films from Pulp Fiction onwards. However, there are occasions where he gets to do something else and where he doesn't get to suck the air out of a scene. And the fact that Pam Grier owns him in that fucking film kind of makes it for me. But I'm watching it for different reasons. But I agree. The whole, like, what was he saying about, I saw him interviewed the other day and he was saying something about soundtracks. It was on that documentary I was watching about blaxploitation films, because I just have been covering Willie Dynamite and Scream, Black Killer Scream. And we've got Black Belt Jones and Black Gun coming up.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, love him. But he was talking on this documentary, he was talking about the theme to Shaft, right? And quite arrogantly and fucking abysmally says in this documentary, while wearing a fucking Kangol hat backwards and a loud Jamaican-style yellow shirt, I'm like, you're not black, stop it. He says it's kind of wasted on Shaft. He's like, if I had the theme to Shaft, I would open up my motherfucking movie, is what he says. And I'm like, oh, like the opening to Shaft with him coming out the subway and the theme and everything.
Yes.
Like, it's perfect. It doesn't, like, that's exactly what it should be. It's doing and saying all the things it should be. And he would want to make a big issue out of, like, look, I'm using the theme to Shaft. He even says at one point, he says, Italian, is it? No, he says Hong Kong movies or Kung Fu movies have used the theme to Shaft better than Shaft has. And I'm like, that sticks in my craw, like, big time. I'm like, fuck you. That, like, Shaft used it. You wouldn't know the theme to Shaft if it wasn't in Shaft. And it, like, shut the fuck up. You know, like, what are you talking about? Like, it uses it the way it was intended to be used. Right. There's even some sequences of behind the scenes of Shaft. And I'm going to forget off the top of my head, the director, Gordon
Parks Jr.
Gordon Parks Jr.,
Or was it Gordon Parks? I always get the two of them confused.
And in the behind the scenes, Gordon Parks. In behind the scenes, Gordon Parks is saying to Isaac Hayes, so we're going to see Shaft come out of the subway. We want it to start, like, with the hi-hat and the cymbal and the thing, and then we really want it to, like, blow out once he's walking through the city, and which is exactly what it does. That is a director talking to a composer about the shots he's going to film the next day with the actor so that it all blends in together. It's not like, oh, I saw this in a movie once, so I'm going to film it my own way, but instead I'm going to use a crane and I'm going to use a wide-angle lens and I'm going to use, whatever. And then I'm going to put the theme to Shaft on it, because isn't the theme to Shaft cool? It's right. Like, then go away and remake movies. If that's really your desire, go do what Eli Roth's about to do with Death Wish and ruin it for everybody.
I've gotten into so many arguments, or I got into at least one major argument with a millennial who thought that the music that was in Inglourious Bastards was written for the film. And when I was trying to explain to them, no, this is a theme from another movie that is being used in here, they just couldn't believe it. And because to them, it married up perfectly. And I was like, no, when I hear it, when this theme plays, I'm thinking of Lee Van Cleef. I am immediately taken out of this film. I'm not caring about Nazis and all this stuff. I'm immediately going back to Lee Van Cleef, going through a cornfield or whatever. And it's just like, this is not the movie to me. To just pick up a theme and move it into another film just doesn't work unless you've never been exposed to that theme before, and then you might think, oh, this was written for this movie. But yeah, anybody who has seen other films, it's just going to rock you right out of it.
Yeah, and it is that thing where I understand where he's coming from. I mean, you think of all the filmmakers that after they saw Evil Dead or Evil Dead 2 started to do, ridiculous camera angles. Like almost every student film when I was at college in like 99 through to 2002, almost every student film, mine included, had Dutch angles all over the place and cameras whizzing all over the place and da-da-da-da-da. However, the difference, and you look at early Edgar Wright stuff, you look at early Eli Roth stuff, you look at a lot of films that kind of came out sort of post that, like my generation making films. They all have a touch of that in it, and they're all borrowing from those movies. But they're not, like what you're saying, taking something that is so inherently recognizable from an iconic sequence and putting it in a completely different context. Right. Because there is a history and a language to movies that kind of needs to... It's why people go, why do you hate remakes so much, John? Why do you hate remakes? Remakes have been with us since the beginning and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, because at some point I'm going to be having a conversation and I'm going to say Dawn of the Dead and I'm going to have to go the original. No, the original from the 70s. What do you mean you don't know that there's an original from the 70s? It's not so much that Hack Snyder made a piece of shit film and whatever, it'll disappear and nobody will give a shit about it ultimately. It's the fact that the history, the story, the cinema, the movies, the thing, there's a timeline here. And movies haven't been around long enough for us to be fucking doing pale, piss-poor imitations of them. It's not been an art form long enough. And if even now, if someone turned around and went, oh, look, I've painted Van Gogh's sunflowers, people would go, I don't care, fuck off, I have the original. Or if someone turned around and went, oh, I've done a nice cover version of Hard Day's Night, people would be like, that's great, but I'm going to buy the original Beatles album because I can go and buy the original Beatles album. So I don't understand why movies somehow get a pass. And people go, well, we've been telling Shakespearean stories in different ways. I'm like, but that's different. That's theater. It's not. There are some characters, James Bond, Sherlock Holmes, you could argue Indiana Jones, maybe a few others where, Macbeth, Henry VIII, whatever it is, there are certain characters that, yes, you can tell endless stories with, and that's acceptable. But that's not the same as remaking it. If you went, I'm going to do this film, Hound of the Baskervilles, the Hammer Horror one, with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, but I'm going to remake it, and it's going to have Chris Pratt and fucking Ryan Gosling in it, I'd be like, no, fuck off. I've no interest in seeing that. And why would I? But, anyway. You know what I'm saying, Mike. I just needed to vent to someone who understood.
I gotcha.
Yeah. We've heard today we've heard this week that Eli Roth is remaking Death Wish. So,
well, it's one of those things where let's just see if it actually happens. I mean, we've heard about a remake of Escape from New York for years now, and thank God that's never happened. So who knows?
True.
I mean, Eli Roth, one of his last films was a remake of Death Game, and nobody seemed to care because nobody remembers Death Game. I cared.
Right.
Because I love that movie.
Yep, just keeps on going. And now Kevin Smith has announced, of course, that because he can't do Clerks 3 and Mallrats 2, he's going to do Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, which is going to be a sequel to Jay and Silent Bob Strikes Back, but about the way that Hollywood reboots things these days. So that'll be a lot of in-jokes about reboots. That'll be fun, right? You looking forward to that, Mike?
Yeah.
I was a defender of Kevin Smith until I heard that pitch today on his podcast. But anyway, all right. Well, look, sir.
Big fan of Tusk and Yoga Hosers?
I will defend Tusk and Yoga Hosers. I can't say that I'm a big fan of Yoga Hosers the movie. I like Tusk the movie until his cinematographer doesn't understand how to light practical special effects properly. Then I'm taken out of the film because I'm like, it's as good as that makeup effect is. A makeup effect, like we all know about practical effects, are only as good as the way they are lit. John Carpenter's The Thing is a prime example of how 30, 40 years later it still fucking stands up because it's lit so fucking well that the rubbery, gooey, held by monofilament little creatures or aliens or bits of body or whatever it is are lit well and work well. However, Tusk, the biggest problem is when you finally see the reveal, the thing that should be nerve-wracking and sickening, it's not, because it's lit just with bright natural light, and that's problematic. But I will go to the ends of the earth for him to have the right to make those movies, because I have no problem with him churning out $1 million, $2 million movies that make their money back because they sell them to foreign things, and he just carries on making little movies, not bothering anyone. He's not trying to be, Zack Snyder or any of these assholes. So he's not trying to be Eli Roth even. So he's just putting out his little movies to his fans, and that's it. He's doing what Robert Rodriguez has been doing for years. It's just people think Robert Rodriguez is cool because Robert Rodriguez doesn't do 800 podcasts a week. And if he did, we'd all be fucking sick of Robert Rodriguez. Some people are sick of Robert Rodriguez after the Machete films. But, I mean, he is simply doing the same thing other than he didn't build his own studio. But apart from that, he's doing exactly the same thing as Robert Rodriguez. So if he can do it, why can't Kevin Smith? That's how I feel.
Yeah, I just think that, podcasting is way overrated, and he should really, not even associate himself with that medium, because only jerks do that.
Yes, only sad, lonely basement dwellers do that, right? That's all that podcasts like.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what we're told all the time. And also, like, do you find this? Let me ask you this question, Mike, podcaster to podcaster. Whenever you see those articles, and I see them all the time in like Facebook groups and things, like podcasting on the rise, or 10 steps to having a successful podcast, or is podcasting the latest media that's whatever, blah, 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 blah. Like, don't you suddenly want to stop doing a podcast at that point? Like when you see articles like that? Because I'm like, the whole point, the one thing I agree with Kevin Smith on is the whole point about podcasting is A, anyone can do it, and B, a podcast can be anything.
Exactly.
I once read an article where the guy was like, well, you want to keep your theme song down to 20 seconds long. You want your podcast no longer than 25 minutes long. I'm like, what do you mean you want? What are you talking about? Who wants? You want that. I don't want that. I want to be able to do a comedy sketch that people turn on and go, what the fuck is this? And tune out. Like, I want that. It might not be money-making. It might not be hugely successful. But, like, I want to be able to produce a comedy sketch every week. And the people who love it. And then they also love the movies we talk about and blah, 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 blah. If I want a 5-minute theme song, if I want to stop my podcast in the middle and put in clips of me playing the tuba in the bath, I can do that and go fuck everyone else who doesn't like it. I don't, so yeah, that almost makes me want to stop podcasting.
Yeah, those groups are very, very frustrating, I have to say. And yeah, especially the, how much money do you make on your podcast every week? It's like, really? Are you in this for the money?
Yeah, right. You're in the completely wrong industry for the money. And the other thing is great. It's like, I just started my podcast and I already have 100,000 downloads. Right. No, you don't. No, you don't. That is absolute horseshit. And you can go tell people on Facebook you have 100,000 downloads after only podcasting a week about your sock drawer or whatever the fuck your podcast is about, but you don't. Even if all your family downloaded it 5 times. So that always bugs me. And I did an interview recently on another show about this, and I was saying, if you're podcasting, because I was talking about when I started, I was on TalkShoe, and TalkShoe doesn't have great stats. That's its one downside, but it's completely free, and they allowed you to do 100 meg an episode, as many episodes as you wanted, which didn't exist anywhere else. And I was like, that's tremendous. So I was on Talk Show for the longest time. And the only downside was the stats. And I used to say time and time again, and I still believe it, if you're doing a podcast for either numbers or money or fame, you are completely the wrong person to be doing a podcast. And you shouldn't be podcasting because that's not what it's about.
I just do it all for the nookie.
Yeah, you do. You do it for all the huge podcast groupies that you're surrounded with at all times.
Yes.
Anyway,
the huger, the better.
Anyway, sir, it has been a pleasure, as always, to talk to you. I'm so glad I finally got you on the After Movie Diner. I hope that it was a pleasure to be on your show doing Duck Soup. That was tremendous. And I hope that at least once a year we can dip back into each other's shows and say hello, because that would be awesome.
Yeah, definitely. So I will keep you on the radar. You know me, I plan out way too far in advance. So being OCD, that's one of my big downfalls. So we'll have to look at something coming up in either December of 2017 or maybe January of 2018. Oh my God.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine. Either one is fine. We'll interact, no doubt, on social media, and I'll keep playing your promos. But thanks ever so much, sir, for being a guest on the After Movie Diner. It won't be the last time if I have anything to do with it. And thanks very much for talking Pit Stop with us tonight. Please tell everyone where they can find you if they didn't know already.
You can find me over at projection-booth.com. And thank you, John, for having me on. This was a lot of fun talking movies with you. Yes,
it was indeed, sir. Thanks ever so much. I am now going to pass out. Well, I have to put my laundry away first, but I'm going to pass out after that. But all the best to you, sir. Thanks ever so much, and let's speak soon.
You've been listening to the After Movie Diner with your host, Jon Cross.
If you've liked any of the music that you routinely hear at the end of our show, don't forget you can go over to miscplumbingfixtures.bandcamp.com and purchase some of it, or you can just go over to Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures on Spotify or Google Play or Amazon or any of those places and stream it. All and every little bit helps. We'd hang out most every night, talking rebellion over a tasty bite, but acting like we didn't have a care. Your eyes were torches under thick black mascara, and I could never take my eyes off you. We were both gonna compete in Battle of the Bands, and I was nervous about my cheap guitar, but I knew your talent would take you far. When I saw you playing drums in sticky taco hands, the boys would ask me what I saw in you. They were just jealous and stupid too. You were everything in your tattered Cure t-shirt. We'd made plans to run away and to take the country by storm one day, to shout at the sky and kick some dirt. I'd come and watch you rehearse. Everyone else was 100 times worse. I could spend the rest of my life up in the stands, cheering for you every single night. The rhythm and music nice and tight when you played drums in sticky taco hands. Then came the day when you fell ill. My whole world came to a standstill. No rich adventures and love for you and me. And I visited you every single day. All your favorite 45s we would play, until the nurses told us off repeatedly. Your second to last night we escaped to the roof, tried that drink that was 80% proof, lay under the stars and talked of future plans. Now I'm alone and that I can't fix. You left me all the memories and a pair of sticks from when you played drums in sticky taco hands.